Straight ahead on Law and Crime Daily.
The solution is transparency plus accountability equals trust.
But there's been a delay in the release of grand jury recordings concerning the death of Breonna Taylor.
Plus, jailhouse recordings in the disturbing trial of a Tennessee man accused of stabbing his parents to death and dismembering their bodies.
And the governor takes action after the widow of Kobe Bryant files a lawsuit over officers taking up-close photos of the scene where he died.
It was so dismissive and so disrespectful to this woman who lost her husband and her child.
Law and Crime Daily covers court cases from coast to coast.
And welcome everybody to Law and Crime Daily. I'm Aaron Keller along with Brian Buckmeyer and Terry Austin. A delay in the release of grand jury recordings in the police shooting death of Breonna Taylor. The Kentucky Attorney General is asking for more time to make edits to more than 20 hours of material presented to the grand jury. A judge previously ruled that the recordings would be made public by noon Wednesday. 13 people stepped forward and asked that information which could be used to identify them be cut out of the material. The new deadline is Friday. Here's how the Attorney General argued for the delay. In the interest of protection of witnesses and in particular private citizens named in the recordings, the Commonwealth seeks to redact personal identifiers of any named person and to redact both names and personal identifiers of any private citizen. Counsel for defendant has expressed agreement with the motion herein. That is from the Office of the Kentucky Attorney General. Breonna Taylor was shot and killed by police officers executing a no-knock warrant. Her boyfriend pulled his gun and fired, thinking the intruder was Taylor's ex-boyfriend. Attorney Ben Crump represents Taylor's family and tells me the grand jury materials should be released as soon as practical.
I understand there were some concerns about redactions, hopefully only on identifications, because what we want is full transparency. We want to know what evidence the Kentucky Attorney General Daniel Cameron present to the grand jury. Did he present any evidence on behalf of Breonna Taylor? And if he didn't, then he unilaterally made a decision to help exonerate the police officers for killing her and denied her family any due process of the law, denied them their day in court, and in essence, denied Breonna Taylor justice. And so that's why we continue to demand all the transcripts of the full grand jury proceedings be released.
Crump believes the interests of transparency should require the names of the officers to be released if they're contained within those grand jury recordings. And he hopes the Attorney General included all evidence concerning whether the police announced their presence at Breonna Taylor's door, not just some of the evidence.
I'm not surprised anybody's asking that their name be kept private. However, those law enforcement officers who executed this, I believe, dangerous, unconstitutional, and in this case, illegal no-knock warrant, names should be identified, and it should be identified what they said to the grand jury. Also, what neighbors were allowed to testify. So did he present just the last version that was agreeable with the law enforcement narrative, or did he put forth all the statements of that potential neighbor witness? Because these things are important for Breonna Taylor. She has a right to have a voice, have somebody advocating for her to get justice, even though she's dead and gone.
Brian and Terry here now. So Terry, there's a distinction to be made here between personal identifiers and names. My read of the actual language of the court document is that we will be getting the names of the officers involved, and that's important.
That's exactly right. And the motion really said for those named parties, we just don't want identifying information like their addresses. But for private citizens, no one needs to see what their names are, and definitely no one needs to see any personal identifiable information as relates to them. So I think the motion made sense.
So Terry, you agree with cutting this information out of the record? Do you think it's going to get in the way of finding out what really happened here?
It's not going to get in the way. I think you're going to have all the substantive information. And I think because we have the names of the officers, we'll know what they did and we'll know exactly what the evidence shows as it relates to those officers.
Brian Buckmeyer, do you agree or disagree? Do we need complete transparency here?
Without getting identifying information from private citizens, as well as those more private information that we get from officers, we don't need to know their addresses. We don't need to know private citizens' names. We simply need to know the what, not necessarily the who.
Is there a chance, however, that this could cut too far into the content? Is there possible trickery involved here? Are you afraid of that?
Again, Aaron, you're asking the public defender if he's wary of the prosecutor resorting to some sort of trickery and going too far. I think he's going to try to redact as much as possible, and there may be some pushback from the court. This may not just be a simple release on Friday. There may be some give and take over the course of the next couple of days.
If other cases give us any lessons, oftentimes that is how these cases go. We will be watching for this release on Friday. And now to day 3 of testimony in the gruesome and gory murder trial of Joel Guy Jr. He's the 32-year-old accused of stabbing his parents to death on Thanksgiving weekend. Testimony revealed that the parents were making plans to retire and were going to cut off the defendant financially. They had been paying for his apartment.
She had stated that they were going to retire and it was time for Joe Michael to stand on his own 2 feet. He was an adult.
And did she discuss her future plans on whether or not she could help support her son?
She said that she couldn't do that no more.
Okay.
That he needed to be on his own.
They said that they were going to wait till Christmas to talk to Joe Michael, that they were going to have him to start paying his bills and stuff.
Okay.
They had said that they were retiring and that they were moving to Sigornsville, and that Joe Michael was going to find a job or need to find a job.
The relatives all add up, but also body camera footage from responding officers showing a pot on the stove. Authorities say they found the head of the defendant's mother inside the pot right there on the right-hand side of your screen. Upstairs, a detective testified that he found more body parts.
I see a human hand. It was lying in an upright position with another human hand that was closed fist behind it.
Troubling testimony there, and still ahead on Law and Crime Daily. Jailhouse recordings shed some light on the relationship between defendant Joel Guy Jr. and his parents. And later on in the broadcast, the state of California taking legal steps to prevent exactly the type of invasion of privacy Kobe Bryant's widow says the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department committed when her husband and daughter died in a helicopter crash. That is when Law and Crime Daily returns in just a moment. We're back now to the trial of Joel Guy Jr., where the state says the defendant planned to kill and dismember his parents. Law and Crime Daily's Terry Austin explains how prosecutors are demonstrating premeditation to the jury. Terry?
Aaron, the state called law enforcement officers from Louisiana who gathered surveillance videos which showed Joel Guy Jr. buying muriatic acid, gloves, and cleaning materials weeks before the murder. On November 19, 2016, he is seen buying a knife at a sporting goods store. 2 days later, he bought plastic bins from Walmart. Investigators say they found the victim's body parts in those same containers. The following day, the defendant purchased garden home pipe adapters. And finally, on the day of the murders, the defendant is seen with his hand bandaged while purchasing medical supplies. The defense declined to cross-examine the officers.
And the defendant, of course, was arrested the day after the bodies of his parents were discovered. Law and Crime Daily's Brian Buckmeyer has details on that arrest. Brian.
It was a multi-agency effort to take the defendant into custody outside of his Baton Rouge apartment. Authorities found a meat grinder and a gas can hidden in Guy's car. When they took a closer look at his hands, they noticed a deep cup on his fingers. He initially told doctors he, quote, tumbled down 3 stairs carrying breakables, but in a pretrial hearing last year, Guy changed his story. He agreed to a stipulation that says his hands were injured in an altercation with his parents.
And after the defendant's arrest, he called his best friend and former roommate from jail. The call was recorded and the jury heard it.
Well, I've pretty much everything up. I don't really have much of a chance of being happy anymore. But you do. You do. I don't know what to say. I mean, I don't know that there is anything to say. I mean, I'm here. I'm there. Tell me, I'm idiot. Tell me, why did I do this? Blah, blah, blah.
On cross, the defense managed to give the jury some insight into the defendant's relationship with his parents.
You didn't even know he had sisters.
Correct.
So at no time when you guys were living in Baton Rouge did any of the family come and visit?
Correct.
And did you ever see mail come to the apartment from any of the family members?
No.
Presents?
No.
You described Joel as being socially awkward. Is that accurate?
Yes.
As I think you've described him as he got older, after high school, he became more and more isolated and withdrawn.
Yes.
And he would go into his room at time for days. Is that right?
Yes.
And you said, I believe you've stated that there were weeks where you would just barely see him at all.
Right.
By the time you left Baton Rouge, would you say that he had any friends at all?
No.
During the period of time that you knew him, did you know that he regularly, did you know him to regularly go home for Thanksgiving?
Yes.
And I believe you said that he would alternate Christmas.
Yes.
You did know that he was going to Thanksgiving, he was going home for Thanksgiving in 2016, right?
Yes.
And on redirect, the state asked if it was the defendant's choice to be isolated from friends and family.
Do you know whether or not he was ashamed of his mother?
No.
Okay. Do you know whether or not she provided him support?
Yes.
Did you ever know Mr. Guy to have a job during the time that you knew him?
Not a paid one.
Okay. Okay. So he had an apartment
Mm-hmm.
and a car.
Yep.
And she was paying his utilities.
Yes.
And all of his bills.
Yes.
Okay. And this notion that he was isolated and withdrawn, is it your understanding that that was something that he didn't want, or was that of his choosing?
I would say the latter.
That it was his choosing?
Yes.
He liked to spend time by himself?
Yes.
Okay, we're back to that motive of money. Brian, I've got to back up a bit here. Is there any rational reason why the defendant would have conceded that he injured his hand in some sort of an altercation with his parents?
Aaron, I hope so. I know when you watch these cases, I don't have the defense attorney's file. I only have a fraction of the information provided. But this makes no sense to me. You're basically walking the jury towards a guilty verdict when you instead should be doing the opposite. It's conceding a little bit too much for my liking.
Terry, what do you think? Is this something that the defense just should have steered completely clear of, not conceded that, or maybe did the defense get something in return?
Well, you know, I think the defense has to acknowledge the fact that these cuts are on his hand, and they have to give some sort of explanation as to how they got there. We all know that when there are stabbing motions, oftentimes the defendant gets cuts on his hand. So it's a difficult situation, I think, for the defense attorney to be in.
And the prosecution scored some more points by bringing the discussion back to this alleged motive of premeditation and money. Terry.
Absolutely. I mean, that is what the prosecution has to do. He has to show that there's a reason the defendant is doing this. Obviously, from a burden of proof perspective, you don't have to show the motive, but it always helps to convince the jurors.
And when we come back here on Law and Crime Daily, sentencing for a defendant caught up in a so-called sex cult. Also, normally, courthouses are quiet places on weekends, at least until a truck comes crashing through the door. It happens not once, but twice. What were they after? You'll find out. Cameras in courtrooms capture many memorable moments, but not many are quite like this next one. Here's another installment from Court Cam with Dan Abrams, which Law and Crime produces for the A&E network.
We head over to Harris County Precinct 2 Courthouse in Pasadena, Texas, where it's very early on a Sunday morning, and all is quiet until a group of brazen robbers backed their pickup right through the front of the building. And what reason did they have for crashing a truck through this Texas courthouse? To steal an ATM machine just off camera. This is just one of a series of recent break-ins involving ATMs in official Harris County buildings. The men move quickly as one works on getting a tow strap out of the back of the truck. He runs over to secure the strap to the ATM, then returns to the vehicle, but when he fumbles opening the passenger door, he jumps in back, just as the truck hits the gas to dislodge the ATM. With nothing more than what appears to be a bare cash deposit box, the thieves come up empty and drive off. But just 3 days later, after the courthouse boarded up the windows, they're back to try to finish the job. This time they get their hands on the ATM, but the credit union that owns the machine has already removed the cash after the first attempt. The men realize this and leave empty-handed once again. A month later, after stealing an ATM from the Harris County Tax Office building, the group's spotted by police and finally busted. The ATM crime spree's final tally includes several buildings hit, including 2 courthouses, $200,000 worth of damage caused, and about $60,000 stolen. Angel Lopez, Thomas Ortega, and Toby Perkins are arrested and charged with theft, while 2 other couples are busted for acting as their lookouts.
When we come back, a woman accused of trying to take the infant grandchild of gridiron great Joe Montana makes an apology through her attorney. That and other stories are coming up. A federal judge has handed down an 81-month sentence for Claire Bronfman, the heir to a Seagram's liquor fortune. Bronfman pleaded guilty to playing a role in a so-called sex cult named NXIVM, and she's believed to have given the group tens of millions of dollars. Bronfman wrote a letter to the court expressing her sorrow, but asked only for probation. Prosecutors sought a 5-year sentence. The judge decided Bronfman deserved more. The woman accused of trying to kidnap Football Hall of Famer Joe Montana's granddaughter has made her first court appearance. Sodzai Dalzell pleaded not guilty to attempting to kidnap the 9-month-old baby. The defendant's lawyer told reporters that her client is extremely apologetic. Montana told Los Angeles County Sheriff's deputies the woman entered his home over the weekend. His wife Jennifer managed to pry the baby away from that defendant's arms, they say. Dalzell fled and was arrested at a nearby home. The governor of California has signed a new law in the wake of a controversy surrounding the death of NBA star Kobe Bryant. The law makes it a misdemeanor for emergency workers to use their access to accidents and crime scenes to take photos of victims for reasons other than an official investigation. Kobe Bryant's wife, Vanessa, is suing the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department because she says deputies photographed her dead husband and daughter after keeping others from the scene of the deadly chopper crash which killed the pair and others. The sheriff said 8 deputies were accused of taking or sharing the photos and ordered the images deleted. Law&Crime analyst and former SWAT team member Lisa Lockwood recently told us the officers' actions were unbecoming of their department.
If the public was there and they took pictures and they had it on their cell phone, they have every right to. It's in a public place. They could have sold those images. The police officers could have sold those images, and this could have gotten a lot worse. So is it cause for firing? Probably not. And it would be based on priors with the police officers. So departments across the nation are going to look at this now. When we get these photographs, what do we do with these photographs that we've taken from a crime scene to aid the person who is investigating this? And then how do we dispose of these and make sure that they're not out there for public circulation? And this has been happening for a long time, trust me. It's just coming out now, fortunately.
Okay, Brian, so we're talking about a misdemeanor here. What's the penalty if someone dares violate this in California?
All right, so it's not quite laws yet, and they've only tried to push it forward. A misdemeanor in California falls under 2 categories. The standard misdemeanor, punishable by 6 months. A gross misdemeanor can be punishable by up to 364 days, 1 day shy of a full year.
So, Terry, we have to differentiate here between legitimate photos that are taken as part of an investigation. We need them as evidence in court. The government has a burden that it must meet if it's trying to convict someone or get into an investigation. Those photos are necessary and they're part of an officer's job. We're talking about private photos that people are taking for their own reasons, and that's flat out wrong.
It's absolutely wrong. The fact that these officers took out their personal phones and took these photos really is disgusting, frankly. And I do think that there should be some ramifications. And it makes sense to me that Vanessa Bryant, the husband, the wife of Kobe Bryant here, made a lawsuit, a civil action against the sheriff's office for allowing the photos to be shared.
And there's other defendants in that case as well, Terry.
Well, actually, she also brought a wrongful death action against the helicopter company. And that makes sense. That what it tells me is that Vanessa Bryant is protecting her husband, protecting her family, bringing 2 civil actions, which hopefully will benefit the estate. So she's doing the right thing here.
It's such a sad case all the way around. We've got all this litigation surrounding it. Terry, is the punishment fair, assuming that this law rolls out? Should it be a misdemeanor? Should it be worse? Should there be more ramifications?
Well, I think it could be higher than, just a penalty as far as paying money is concerned and not that much time in jail. Because if you think about it, these police officers are supposed to be protecting us, not taking advantage. And so I do think that there should be some accountability here.
And it looks like this is another step in that process. The governor signed the law. We'll keep an eye on how it rolls along if anyone ultimately faces a charge going down the chain. Brian and Terry, we're out of time. Thanks for joining us on Law and Crime Daily, as always, to discuss justice in America.
I'm Dan Abrams, and this is the Law and Crime Network. The only 24/7 network with expert legal analysis and gavel-to-gavel live trial coverage. Watch the Law and Crime Network today.